Hi everyone, it's Tara. I am so happy to get to reach out today, and I want to share with you a little story about what happened for me recently, and then a tool and a set of exercises that we're going to go through today that I think can really be so helpful in helping us find our ground during this time and helping us find a North Star to orient around when so much is uncertain and is being deeply felt in us as uncertain. What happened for me a few weeks ago, right after shelter in place came into effect in San Francisco, I was still in that initial huge sense of shock and sense of disorientation. And I was picking up my kids' 900 toys from the living room floor because a lot of toys get on the floor when we're all home all day. And in the middle of doing that, this memory just flooded in of something I haven't thought about in quite some time. I was remembering when I first had started working with a coach for the very first time, and I had been sent these worksheets from the coach to prepare for our first session, to reflect on where I was and what I wanted to get out of coaching and so on. And in those worksheets, there was a part that asked me to identify my core values. And then there was a list of all these gorgeous words like adventure and kindness and openness and honesty and friendship and growth and all kinds of words that represented different core values. And I was being asked to choose which were mine. And I had never been asked this before. I had never been asked to identify my core values. And I scanned the list and I found that some of the words I thought, well, yeah, that's definitely good, but that doesn't really speak to me. Maybe values like tradition or discipline. And then there were ones where I thought, well, I know I've been told that should be my values. But then there were these other words on the list that felt like they really called out to me, like, oh yeah, that's me. That's who I am at the core of me. That's what I love the most in this life. That's what gets me excited just reading the word. And I could identify these things that truly were my values. And then this coach was asking me, well, how expressed are these values? How much are you living your values? And I started to think about that and saw very quickly that at that time in my life, I really wasn't living them very much at all. Creativity, wasn't living it. Wasn't doing anything creative. Spirituality, hadn't been reading spiritual texts, hadn't been doing prayer and other spiritual practices that I cherish. And I suddenly got a whole different lens on what was missing in my life. At the time, I had just come out of business school and I had been in an environment where there was sort of a general prescription for what a good life looks like. And in a way, that's what I had been working toward or what I had not been connecting to, but I didn't know what else to connect to. And here I was really being offered this key of, what if there's a particular composite of experiences and qualities that are my prescription for a fulfilling life? And that looks totally different from someone else's. Those were my core values. And what if I started to orient around living those core values? And that really changed so much in my life and my work. And I think I can attribute that now to a lot of my most beloved parts of my life and my work. So the memory of that whole initial experience of identifying those and changing my life to live them just flooded in. And I thought, well, that's kind of curious. Why on the first days of shelter in place and why in the middle of this chaotic moment of chaos in my home and chaos in the world am I remembering that? And I got the sense that it was as if my brain had been trying to find, where's my ground? Where's my place to stand? Where's the goal post in this dramatically new reality? And if the goal isn't going to be that my day looks the way I want, or my life looks the way I want, or the world is going the way I want it to go, if that's not available, what are the new questions that I can find a yes to? What is the new thing I can measure a day around? And in that search, my brain pulled up the file on core values and pulled up that memory as if to say, core values, go back in this moment to your core values. And so I have, and I've been using those values for me, things like creativity and spirituality, as ways to navigate what I need to sustain myself during this time, but also what I want to bring forward and who I want to be during this time. And so today I want to take you through the exercise of identifying your core values, what they are now, if this is an exercise you've done before, or if you're doing it for the first time, to start to discern what are your core values. And then what does it look like to live them under these circumstances during this time with all the limitations and loss that is present and grief that is present right now. So let's do it. Grab something to write with. You can write on your computer if you need to, or whatever you're watching on, but I highly recommend if you can get a paper and pen, that'll be probably a richer process. And we're going to start with identifying our core values. And one way to do that is with a list, like my coach did for me. And if you Google, not right now, but after this, you can Google core values. There's tons of different lists online, and go through that same intuitive process of seeing which words really call out to you. But there's a second way to identify core values that I think is also really wonderful and can be even more clarifying. So what we're going to start with is that path. And that is to identify some peak experiences from your life. So a peak experience, a time when you felt so fulfilled, a time when you felt you were in that home zone of, this is who I am, this is what I'm meant to be doing, or this just feels so right, this makes me feel so alive. Experiences like that. And be careful, there's a couple pitfalls we can get into there. One is that sometimes our minds jump to the things that we've been taught are supposed to be peak experiences. The day I got my best time in a running race, or the day my company exceeded our goals by the biggest measure. But just check in with yourself, were those really it? Or is that just the narrative about what a life peak experience is? You want to look for what truly brought you that sense of fulfillment and alignment, and not just to your achiever mind or your ego, but to the whole of you. So especially look for those quieter peak experiences. It might be a particular amazing conversation with a friend, or a really incredible hike, or a time that you got absolutely lost in a creative pursuit. So what were those for you? And take a moment to write down a few of those peak experiences. You may have to go back really far in your life. That's okay. Sometimes we have to go back to childhood to find these. Totally okay. So writing down a few peak experiences for you. And you can pause me whenever you need to journal more. Okay. So then from those peak experiences, we're going to look at what was it about each of those that made it so fulfilling for you? What values were being expressed or honored in that experience? So if, for example, let's say someone wrote down who's cooking an amazing meal for some dear friends. And then she's going to ask herself, well, what was it about that made it so fulfilling? And maybe she's going to think, it was that feeling of just being in a sensory physical experience, working with my hands. I love that part. And it was also, she might say, knowing I was giving something, this sense of generosity and connection. Now, what's really fascinating about that is someone else might name the same peak experience. I was cooking a wonderful meal for friends. But if she thinks about, well, what values made it so fulfilling for me, her answers will be totally different, being a unique person. She might say, well, for me, it was actually the connection with the earth and with nature that food brings. And it was this sense of providing healthy nourishment to myself and people I love. Those are values for me, connection with the earth and that sense of supporting health, right? So it's not the experience that defines the values, but what is it underneath the experience that we know, oh yeah, those were the qualities that were at the kernel of it for me. That's what you want to write down. So for each of your experiences, go ahead and look at that question. What values were getting expressed that made it so fulfilling for you? And you can write those down with words or phrases. Sometimes it might need a longer phrase to explain. Okay, pause me if you need more time for writing. Write down your qualities. And then next step is we're going to look at all those qualities you wrote down and now see, okay, if I were to hone that into 3 to 5 core values, what would those be? So you can look at phrases that maybe come up again and again. If you're using 2 different words for what the same thing is, this is the time to just choose one. And create your list of values. And some of your values might be words that everyone else would understand, like you feel like, okay, yeah, the word community or connection really captures that value. But sometimes to really get the texture of it, we have to make up our own term. So your value might be community / circles / empathy, because that's really the thing that encapsulates what you're talking about. Or your value might be hard work / teamwork / overcoming. Your value might be a phrase like freedom and playfulness. So create the term that you need that captures it for you and write down 3 to 5 of the values that show up in any or all of those experiences. So these are your core values, right? And we can look at those as telling us about your essential self, your true self. We can look at them as ways of knowing what's your unique recipe for fulfillment and joy in your life, the ingredients you need. I also like to think about it in the deepest sense as that the divine, the sacred, the good has all of these different facets to it, all of these different aspects. Like everything my coach showed me on that list was an aspect of the divine: adventure, playfulness, love, connection, respect, integrity. And that all of us bring forth different aspects of the divine. We don't get to hold the whole and represent and be the whole because we're manifestations, unique manifestations of the divine. But there are particular facets that we are here to bring forward the most. And these qualities that you just wrote down tell you about what those are for you. So they're not just what fulfills you most, but they're what you have to give as a manifestation of the sacred. So we want to live and express our values fully. One, because it is, I think, one of the greatest sources of joy and energy we can draw on in our lives, but also because it has so much to do with what we're here to do and who we're here to be. So now that you've got your list, you can ask yourself, how expressed are these values in my life? And it can be useful to even use a scale from 1 to 10. Like 10, oh my gosh, this value is fully expressed and flowing forth. 1, this value is not expressed in my life at all. In fact, most of the things in my life actually trample on or conflict with this value. So how expressed is each of these values in your life? You can give it a rating. And this is not to blame yourself or critique yourself. This is just an awareness, a benchmark. And I know when I first did this, I found like, ooh, all my values, 3, 2, maybe a 5 in there. And then I had a clue to what was missing for me. So how expressed are these values in your life? How much room is there for them? How much are you honoring them? And then in these times, I also want us to look with this lens of how have the circumstances of the pandemic impacted how you normally get to express and honor your values, right? There probably were some forms of that value of connection that you used to use that aren't present anymore. Or maybe you had a way of being of service through your job and how you supported people, but now you're not doing that and you're working from home with much less direct service. So noticing what's been changed, not just how we've been typically noticing it, what's changed in our routines, but what's changed in terms of the vehicles that were there for you to live your values. And what might you need to replace that with? So with each value, for the current circumstances, how can you live it here and now in these circumstances? If you're sheltering in place, how can you live it that way? If you're feeling more anger and grief about what's happening in the world you're interfacing with, what does it look like to show up with your values in that? You can pause me and take a minute to write about that. And then next, I also want us to look at how are the circumstances right now giving you new opportunities to live your values, maybe even more meaningfully than you ever have before. What's the potential here to go deeper in living your values, to make them more central, to practice them more urgently? Okay. So from here, you've got a sense of your values, of how expressed they are. And now you get to experience this incredible orientation shift of what if my question is, how do I want to show up? Who do I want to be in this time? What values am I here to express? And how can I do that fully so I can give the gift of those values to others? What if my question can be a little bit less, do I like what I see and how the world is going? And more, how can I be more of who I want to be in the face of that? How can I live my values more fully today? And for some people, there are some big changes that go with that, like maybe a new project or a new direction based on their values. But I also want to underscore that for most of us, there are many micro choices we can make to live our values more. It's how we approach a conversation. It's what we think our intention is going into a meeting. It's how we see the point of homeschooling and how we do it if we're homeschooling kids during this time. It's what we choose to incorporate into our few spare moments of the day. So it doesn't need to take a lot of time or additional time to make those subtle shifts, to make your day and your life more of an expression of your values, more of an expression of you. So thank you for listening. Thanks for embarking on this with me. Feel free to reach out and let me know how it went for you, and sending lots of love to you during this time.